My grandfather and 2 great uncles were interned in Petawawa in the concentration camp.
And how long were they there?
Well, my grandfather was there for almost 2 years, just short of 2 years, and Vincent, my great uncle, was there for the full term of the war.
Oh God! And what was your grandfather's name?
Carmine Carmine.
Yeah. And do you have any idea how that affected them going forward?
Yeah, it affected them in that to incarcerate someone when they're innocent is completely psychologically damaging for the rest of your life, and it also trickles down in through the generations, because when my grandfather did get out, he had to swear to secrecy, not to make any statements about what happened to him, and he was also warned not to speak the Italian language in the home. And so we were robbed of our heritage, of knowing the Italian language. They had to sign papers to be released early before the war ended. I would not have known any of this except when my grandparents were doing some cleaning out of closets. I found 2 paintings and a picture of the concentration camp, and I was just curious, so I brought the pictures to my grandmother, my Nona, and I said, what is this picture of? It looks so austere, and I could see the barbed wire and whatever. And my grandmother had a look of, I can't even explain it, I can still see it. It was just a look of, oh no, I've been found out kind of thing. And she said, your grandfather was interned in a concentration camp. And I went, where? In Germany? She said, no, in Canada. And I was just shocked. She was reluctant to actually talk about it too much. But my grandfather came and he came very young as a teenager to Canada. And when the First World War broke out, he went back, fought for the Allies. And his brother was a general, actually, in the Italian army. And he was killed. And when the war was over, he married my grandmother, who was actually promised to his brother, who died. And my dad was born there, but my grandfather came ahead back over to get things settled for her. And he was also the president of the returning veterans from the First World War. And we believe that and the fact that he had a business in town was the reason why he was picked up on June 10th, 1940, when Italy declared themselves on Hitler's side, which the Italians in Canada were very much against. Very much against. We had family, lots of family that were fighting in the Second World War. He had nephews that were there, and also he had a brother-in-law who was a doctor in the army. So he was very insulted and very hurt to be put in a concentration camp for 2 years.
What a terrible way to treat a citizen.
Yeah. When he came back, and Sandy and I found this out when we went to our very first meeting, when we were collecting all the history on it, because it had not been recorded whatsoever. So 10 years ago, the government had a grant, and we went down to the Columbus Center, and we were in a room with about 100 people. And to hear your story told over and over was just amazing, because my grandfather came back completely silenced. He wouldn't talk about it. My mother was also declared an enemy alien.
Yep.
She came over at 9 years old, and she had to report to a parole officer every month throughout the war.
Wow, what a
And
shame.
she did not want to speak about it.
No.
She did not even want to take part in the research project. They want to put it behind them. It affected their business. They had a confectionery downtown, and if they brought in $20 a day, they were really, really lucky, because the Italians were afraid to associate, well, anyone was afraid to associate with them because they were afraid they'd be sent to Petawawa. They were all taken away across Canada at the same time on the 10th of June, right across Canada. They were put on a train here at 2 a.m. in the morning. They were taken to the stockyards down at the exhibition center in downtown Toronto. And as they were funneled through, there were people that were shouting out at them, "You're going to die. We're going to shoot you." They thought they were being marched to their death.
Wow.
Yeah. Then they were put on a truck and taken to Petawawa. Their clothes were taken away, and they were to wear a prison garb with a bullseye on their back, a big round bullseye, and they were made to work out there was a lumber, whatever, cutting trees, I guess, and they lived in shacks. It was really, really cold. Their families did not know where they were. It took a long time to find that out. My grandfather only got out through the help of the bishop. His very close friend was the head of police chief in North Bay. His name was Clark. One of his best friends was the Flannerys. He was a lawyer. The bishop's name was Digman, and it took them 2 years to get my grandfather home. He left in June, and my dad thinks he came back in May, so it was just short of 2 years.
How important was it for you to have the federal government finally recognize what took place and apologize?
We waited 81 years for it.
Yep.
And Sandy and I were talking, and I never in my life realized how powerful "I'm sorry" could be. It was really well done. It was, unfortunately, it was through COVID, so it was last year, and we had to do it via Zoom. But it was very well done. Each of the federal parties spoke. It was beautifully done. And then in the evening we had a reception, and a Prime Minister was there, Trudeau, and some of the surviving families spoke. It was beautifully done, but I got to tell you, we cried from morning till night that day. It was very, very well done, and it was super powerful. Can't tell you how important. Until it happens to you.
Yeah.
And I would never have imagined it
No.
being so emotional,
No.
but it really was.
It was,
Yeah. It was very well done, considering the circumstances. We would have all gone down to Ottawa to witness it,
Yeah.
but couldn't.
It would have been a beautiful ceremony with
Yeah.
so many Italian Canadians and
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Would have been a very proud moment for Anthony Rhoda as well, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very well spoken. Everyone was. Every party was beautifully said, very heartfelt. Yeah. That's good. Some of the hardships that the families endured was beyond anything. I mean, our family suffered business-wise, but and bank accounts were confiscated, homes were taken away. But the saddest thing of all was that everyone that came back, came back silenced. They changed. They were completely changed their personalities. It was very sad, very hard. Sandy has stories to tell that way too.
Yes, I was really blessed. I won the jackpot when it comes to parents, my mom and my dad. The Second World War was fought on two fronts in my family, with Granddad, my Italian granddad, being put in prison, and my Scottish father, no mixture there at all. My dad was Major Key Sterling in the Algonquin Regiment. I'm from Timmins, and it was fascinating and horrifying to see how those two things interjected over various ways and means, and in ways that you and I couldn't have dreamed up. That I'll tell you one drama. What was just, it's unreal. It was early in the war. The internment all happened in the middle of May 1940. And the Algonquin Regiment was obviously recruiting to fill up their bases. And it was a very warm night later on in the month of June 1940. And the Algonquin Regiment had decided that they would take their new recruits out for a route march. You know, get out there and see if they could march. Some of them can't, you know, it's almost entertaining. In Timmins, the main street is Pine Street and 3rd Avenue. That's the main intersection. And I think it was about 9 o'clock on a very warm June night. And they get to the intersection of Pine and 3rd, busy spot in Timmins. And wouldn't you know, it was exactly 9 o'clock and they hit a red light on Pine Street. That's fine, so they had to stop. Because it was 9 o'clock, 3 buildings down on 3rd Avenue, the Palace Theater was right there. The first show comes out at 9 o'clock. And while the raw recruits were standing there waiting for the light to turn green, people spilled out from the theater onto the sidewalks. And pardon my language, but my mother told me never to be rude, but I will quote. One of the raw recruits, pointing and shouting, said, "Look, there's a dirty Dago bastard." And at that point, the raw recruits broke rank and they dove into the crowd. And they beat up everyone in the crowd that they assumed was Italian. And several of the young fellows decided, well, I'll make a run for home. Maybe I can get home. It just so happens that the Italian community lived in what we called the Manita section of Timmins, which is about 5 blocks down Pine Street. So they thought, I can run, I'll make it home. Well, the raw recruits had another idea. They chased them all home. When the fellows entered their homes, they entered behind them and beat up everybody in the house. But here comes the kicker. There was a very right-wing newspaper, not the Timmins Daily Press, which is a Thompson paper. It was called the, just having a senior's moment here. It produced once a week, the Porcupine Advance, and talk about right-wing. Anyway, they wrote up this story of what had happened on 3rd Avenue. And at the end of the article they said, and it was all organized by Leo Massioli, my grandfather, who was in prison at the time. That's the tenor of the feeling at the time. Hard to imagine. It sort of blows me away. But when you read some of the crazy stuff on social media, you realize we didn't invent it all.
No.
Fake news is not,
No,
it's not new to us.
apparently not. No.
So Sandy had a father that was imprisoned in Germany.
Yeah.
And a grandfather who was imprisoned in our Petawawa concentration camp.
What sacrifice?
Well, for one moment, think of my mom. She was sending care parcels to her dad in Petawawa, and she got the treat of sending care parcels over to the middle of Germany during the Second World War, hoping Dad would get some food. There wasn't much. Dad lost 92 pounds in 6 months, and he was a really little guy. So anyway, there are some funny stories about that, believe it or not. Dad got the parcels, but all the food had been taken out and they were given the toilet paper. So, I mean, it's just, there are blessings in funny places. Anyway, the thing that is a blessing for me is that both my mom and dad went to great lengths to explain to their kids what happened and why. Now, my granddad, I don't think I ever heard him talk about the internment. But that's okay, that's not a criticism. But I was 7 when the war ended, and my older sister was 10. And by that point, she was reading copious things and saying, Dad, you didn't experience it. And Mom, whatever. So Mom and Dad were being asked a lot of questions. And God bless them. They sat us down, and in their words, they tried to make sense of what was done and supposedly why. And having said that, you can never explain away paranoia. Never, never. It was quite terrifying in the way it could be manifested. Just one little personal story about my mom at home with 2 little kids during the Second World War. My uncle, Mom's younger brother, wasn't married at the time. He was a lonesome polecat, so 3 and 4 evenings a week he'd come over to the house. Mom would put us to bed, and Mom and Danny would sit in the living room and chat away quietly, and he would go home around 10:30 at night, and Mom would let him out the back door and lock up. And one night, she, after Danny had gone out, she turned the light out and locked the back door. She heard a funny noise. Unlocked the door, turned on the light, and there's my Uncle Danny unconscious on the floor, on the sidewalk just outside the back door. Someone had clubbed him over the head unconscious and taken his glasses and ground them into the cement. And you wonder, was that a burglary attempt that was interrupted, or was it a hate crime? Everybody knew where my mother lived, and you never know. But that's what you lived with. It was scarier than you would think. Do you think my mother slept well that night? It's almost mind-blowing in knowing what a quiet, calm world we have all been privileged to grow up in, and they gave it to us. So I'm eternally grateful. Granddad was, I think the story that it's so simple, but it's so sad. He spent the better part of a year in the prison camp. He had many people working on his behalf to try and get him out, but it took a while. When he got home, I think he thought he could just pick up from where he left off and keep on trucking, because that's the kind of a guy he was. Well, he'd been home about 3 weeks, and he was walking down 3rd Avenue, and he could see a friend of his coming towards him on the sidewalk. And Leo's thinking to himself, oh, I haven't seen Joe in a long time. We'll have a good chat. And to his horror, he watched Joe go out of his way to get across the street as fast as he could to get away from Leo. And that's when Leo realized what you can't undo. You have no control. And he moved to Toronto. And Timmins was his home like you wouldn't believe. But turns out he couldn't leave it for very long, so he was back and forth a great deal. But it was such a spectacularly emotional time that it just took years and years and years to work your way through it. Not so much, Joan and I were so young. As little kids, you got bits and pieces, and you could. My mom was a master, as she should win an Oscar, actually. She kept things so calm in the house, but there's tension there that little kids are aware of. You're listening to the BBC News every day at noon, where are the soldiers and where's your dad now and all. And it's there, but it's not obvious. And what a job the women at home had, even without someone in an internment camp. It was quite a trick. We were all very lucky to be as sheltered as we were. But I think one of the reasons why most people don't know anything about the Italian internment, and I'm not laying blame here, but the Italian community themselves kept it so quiet. Why would you want to broadcast it? You know, I think the whole idea was, it's over, it's done.
Let's get on with life.
That's right. And they did, because they were troopers.
Sandy's grandfather, Leo, built Northern Ontario. He built the Empire and many other hotels in Northern Ontario.
Yeah.
He was a very prominent citizen.
Yeah, the government knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
When they interned people, they only picked people who were
high profile
or leaders in the community, because they wanted to intimidate everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it worked quite well.
It worked very well.
They knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And my granddad was in prison, but so was his younger brother, my great uncle Tony. And I think it was lovely that they had company in the prison camp, if you could say that. There'd be some moral support there, but it's It's just simply a bizarre
Mhm.
event. Should I tell them the story about the Italian dinner?
This is a true story.
This is a beauty.